Okay, we are live. Hi everyone for tuning in, and welcome aboard to the Tabletop Express. I'm Ryan. I'm not Chris Barrows, but I stole his line. I'm doing today's Creators Corner, and I have with me Jim Felli of Devious Weasel Games.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on, Ryan. This is a real pleasure.
Yeah. Hey. First of all, thank you so much for you know agreeing to do this. I always get a little nervous reaching out to designers, but it's so great, just finally talk with the person that has designed this game and some others that we're going to be talking about today.
Well, thank you.
um, so why don't you let Chris always likes to ask this question starting off, and I'll ask the same thing. Why don't you give the audience your board game origin story? What got you into gaming? What are some highlights that made you want to design your own game?
Wow, that's not a loaded question at all, is
No,
it?
no, totally not. Easy yes or no question.
Yeah, so the answer is 42, and now I'll explain why. So I played your standard games, growing up as a kid, but when I was a junior in high school, this is way back in the mid-70s, I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. And back then, the first edition hardback books, AD&D, were just coming out. And so that was my first intro to games other than your standard like Monopoly and Parcheesi and all that kind of nonsense, or card games, let's say.
Sure.
We played with a bunch of really smart people who probably were the first rules lawyers that I've ever met. And so our dungeon master incorporated Arduin, the Arduin grimoire, which people may remember Dave Hargrave's old stuff, with his D&D campaign. And it was just this amazing chaotic milieu. And that was just so exciting. And that opened up this whole world of, wow, there's more than just this one game out there. So this group I was with on the gaming side, we typically tended more toward role-playing games, your early Villains and Vigilantes, and then Champions, and then D&D mostly. And then we did play a few board games back in the day. The one I remember the most is Cosmic Encounter. And that was back in the days when some of the races were expansion packs you had to buy, right?
Okay.
So I think I have my original box down in the basement wrapped in an old, shopping bag or something.
That was an Avalon Hill one, right?
Yeah,
that's one of the,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then off to college, et cetera, professional life, gaming kind of went on the wayside. And then finally got a group in California together, and then had to move and lost the group, and decided I needed some games that I could get this sort of adventuring experience in, that I didn't have to get a bunch of people together for, or that I could get a small group together for and have a small footprint rather than this huge time commitment. And that's what got me into games.
Nice. And now here you are designing them, which is exciting.
It is.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about some of the designs that some of your design experience, your design stories, like when it came across designing your first game, is Shadows of Malice your first released one? Is that
correct?
And that was your first design as well, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I have Shadows of Malice right over here.
Yeah, Shadows of Malice was that was a game that I designed because I wanted to play D&D, but I didn't want the whole role-playing aspect and the long campaigning aspect. And so this game was designed so that I could experience for myself like a D&D overland adventure kind of story arc with a small footprint. And I'm a huge fan of randomness. And maybe that comes from my scientific background, but
Jim, you
The
there?
rules.
There you are.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Yeah.
So that the rules were consistent, but the variation and the variability could totally upset you or change you.
Yeah.
So I tried to in this one, I wanted to make a game where you weren't bound by class and silly rules like, oh, you're this class, you can't wear armor. Oh, you're this class, you can't use edged weapons. And I didn't want to have standard tropes like dragons or elves or dwarves. So I made all of the players just avatars of light that could take any mortal form they wanted. So if you wanted to play a deer-headed man, you could do that.
Cool.
The physical representation was not important. And then for the creatures, they're all mutated versions of natural creatures. So as you create them on the fly, you may end up with a dragon, but you're not playing these standard monsters that people have these standard story boxes in their heads for.
Yeah. So it sounds like part of the design process for you too was kind of taking what you knew from your D&D experiences then and bringing it out. And it's funny that you bring up randomness for this kind of game. I personally haven't played Shadows of Malice yet, but what I've gathered from what I've been reading about it and everything is that it seems to be tailored towards that adventure role play feel. And what I find interesting about it too is that Board Game Geek has it best as a one player game, and I think that's no, but not disparaging.
No.
Solo, yeah, I love solo gaming. That's so yeah.
So it's funny because I love human interaction.
Yeah.
And for me, I like to think of games as just a vehicle for people to get together and create their own stories.
Sure.
Because, 2 years from now, you're not going to remember, who won what game by how many points. You're going to remember, do you remember that time when you bet it all and you lost? Oh, you lost so bad, right? Those are the stories that stick with you and become your sort of social group legends, right? Your social group history.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about Shadows of Malice was I designed it as a 2 to 8 player game.
Mm-hmm.
And I designed it specifically to force people to cooperate in ways other than just, having common goals and objectives. So like in combat, for example, if you have 2 avatars working together or 3 working together, you are much more effective. You get huge benefits and abilities to interact that you don't get just by playing one character.
Yeah.
So it turns out that after I released it, a whole bunch of people said, hey, this is a great solo game. I just play 2 or 3 avatars by myself. And I still get the multiplayer aspect, right, where I can have the cooperation and the dynamics, but I can play by myself. And I never thought of that. I saw no problem with it. So in the second printing, I changed it to 1 to 8 players as the player count.
Well, it's great that it actually evolved into that point. And Chris is on the chat and he chimed in saying, yes, the game experience, the memories are the things that make board games fun for me. Which
Thanks,
is very
Chris.
true.
I owe you $5.
He'll take you up on that. Don't worry. But that is very true. You absolutely remember those memories. And I want to take a little bit of a focus on not just designing board games, but I know you yourself. You're head of Devious Weasels, right?
I am all of Devious Weasel.
Yeah.
So, I am all my own employees.
Yeah, so it's not just design work. What else are you doing for Devious Weasel, and what's the whole process? I mean, Shadows of Malice was your first design, but I'm assuming it was your first production as well.
That was my first production, and I'll tell you, there's a lot that goes into it, and I learned a whole bunch. So I'll come up with an idea, I'll design it, I'll make prototypes. I love to play with little fiddly things like, you go on Amazon and you buy little wooden discs and put stickers on them and all that kind of stuff and make your prototypes. But then there's the quote process. And when I designed Shadows of Malice, I realized that you really need to think about components as you're designing for a couple of reasons. One is there's cost involved, right? Oh, I would love poker chips. Oh, I would love metal coins, but those costs add up a lot. And the general rule of thumb is if you're going through normal distribution channels and not a Kickstarter, for example. So by that, I mean the game's produced, it goes to wholesalers who sell it to distributors, and then it shows up in your stores, right?
Yeah.
The general rule of thumb is your retail price is about 5 times your production cost. So if it costs you $10 to produce a game, you're going to be, charging $50 for that game.
Okay.
Actually, it's actually more than that, because it's not just the cost to produce, it's the cost to produce and ship and the artwork and the tooling and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's why these board games can get pretty expensive. So you're dealing with components, then you've got to get the artwork in the style, in the format that's acceptable to the printer, which means you've got to get obviously everyone knows about, DPI, dots per inch, and all that, high quality pictures. But you might not realize, like I didn't, that you need to use a whole different color scheme. Right? Are you familiar with Cmyk Colors?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. So when people work on computers, they work in RGB, red, green, blue. But in printing, it's 4-color printing. The other thing that's really tricky is that sometimes you can get bitten by false black, right? So you need to make sure your blacks are true blacks. Then if your color intensity is off, the ink they put on the cards, for example, will run. So you got to work with a pre-print specialist to help you with all of this. Then you think about the words, right? You write the text. That should be really easy. Well, it's not easy there either, because there's about a dozen fonts called Arial. So you can't just say it's Arial font.
Sure.
You got to use vector fonts, right? Yeah. So this is a whole huge learning curve. And when someone is designing a board game and they come and they tell you they need somebody to do graphics and they need somebody to do the text layout and the mock-ups. This is why, because they don't want to learn all this stuff by themselves.
Yeah.
So I write the manuals. I do some of the artwork. I do all the iconography and all of the art layout and the art direction and the sort of design. I will farm out specific artwork. I have a couple of favorite artists that I like to employ. And then when you put the package together, then I go through all the proofing and do all the design specs, meaning, will this be a punch out? How many punch outs will be on the board? How do you design the die that's going to cut the pieces out of the board? Then I generally pay to have it made and shipped. And I have a contract with a fulfillment company who takes over when it hits the U.S. warehouse.
Man, that's a whole.
Is that too much? Is that more than you wanted to know?
No, this is great to know. This is honestly great to know, because even people that are watching this either now or after the fact and wanting to learn about being their own board game designer, there's a whole different process from designing a board game to actually producing one. And that's why I love having someone that's doing literally the whole game caboodle.
So a lot of people will split it and say, sorry, my dog is really bothering me right
now. That's okay. That's okay.
So if you just want to do the design, then you're basically becoming a design house. Then what you're going to do is say, here is a rule set, for example. Here's the way the game plays. Excuse me. Here's how the mechanisms work. Here's all the mechanics behind the mechanisms. Here's A, B, and C. And you would try to sell that to a publisher. And if the publisher buys it, the publisher does all of that other stuff that I just told you about.
Yeah.
The art direction and the rule book writing, all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to do all this stuff to be a quote unquote board game designer.
Sure.
You have to do all that stuff to be a designer plus publisher. How's that?
Sure. Yeah. And that's totally understandable. But I do like that you did mention like everything that you do and that you reach out for artwork as well too. So I do want to change it up to your second release design, which
Sure.
is Zimby Mojo, because I mean that art is great on the front cover, you know.
So that was a young lady named Naomi Robinson, and she is out in the UK.
Okay.
She's a fabulous artist. I cannot recommend her highly enough. And she is a really great person for interactive art development. So what I mean by that is, if she produces something and you go back and say, listen, I think this feature is a little bit too reminiscent of another image I've seen, or I don't like the way the blacks are competing with the greens or something like that. No problem. She'll fix it. And she's got a fast turnaround, and she's really very good.
Nice. So, what one thing that I do like about Devious Weasel Games is that the theme is absolutely unique. And I want to talk a little bit about Zimby Mojo in terms of theme. And do you find when designing board games, there's always a question is theme driving the mechanics, or are mechanics driving the theme? How does it relate to this game in particular?
Okay, so first off, I'm going to share with you my vernacular, which is slightly different than what a lot of people use.
Mhm.
Okay, so for me, the theme of Zimby Mojo is survival and capture the flag. The setting is cannibals in an island with a king. For me, mechanisms and mechanics are different things. So, for example, you might say, I'm going to use an auction mechanism in order to buy something. The mechanics behind that are how you execute the auction. Do you use sealed bid? Do you use cards, et cetera, et cetera? So when we talk, I'm going to try to be very careful about what I call a mechanism versus a mechanic,
Sure.
and a theme versus a setting. So I hope I didn't
No, no,
upset
no.
you with it.
Oh, please, please, please. Yeah.
So for Zimby Mojo, and for all of my games, the setting is first, then the theme comes second, and then the mechanisms follow, and the mechanics are last. So I wanted to do a game about crazy cannibals, and I wanted there to be, yes, you can eat your people, and I wanted magic, and I wanted chaos, and I wanted cooperation for part one, and then have people turn on each other. And then now, big deal, what does that mean? So then came that was the setting. So then came the theme, right? The theme will be, okay, kill the king, take his crown, right? So it's basically a capture the flag. Then the mechanisms were, well, they've got to be a cannibalistic mechanism. There's got to be a sort of way to cast spells. There's got to be some way to move. How do I want to do that? And then came trying to figure out ways to do that integrated and seemed logical, right? Yeah. So, for example, one way to have a mechanic to drive a movement mechanism is to roll dice for how far you go. Another one is to say you can move this far or less, you pick. I chose to use a mechanism, a movement mechanism that was driven by mechanics of it depends on how many are moving and how much you're willing to pay. Okay. So for me, again, to answer your initial question, it's how do I want the game to feel and feature, then what I want it to be about, and then what kind of moving pieces are going to allow me to give people a fun experience, and then how do I make those moving pieces work without making it too clunky?
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I love hearing that the differences between the what terminology we're using, because it's great to hear from you. How are you designing it? I know Josh in the comments wrote down that it's really fascinating to hear about these nuts and bolts of producing a game, and it's great to hear about everything from idea to I guess, selling it at Gen Con,
Yeah,
and
trying to get
demo.
stock at Gen Con sometimes.
Yeah, and demoing. Yeah, well, that's true too. And demoing it in front of people, it's just a whole thing. Um, so I am gonna bring it to the next game because why not? Let's just keep it going.
Sure,
So after Zimby Mojo, we have that's not Bemused. That's
that's not bemused.
Sumo. That's from a previous slide. Well, for those of you, let's talk about Bemused and ignore the that thing. I'll bring it just back to us. So let's talk about let's talk about Bemused.
All right.
I'll get a better picture.
So for Bemused, I was trying to think about. I don't know. I really don't know what put me on the idea of the concept of muses. Um, I might have been watching a movie where they said, "Who is your muse?" or something like that,
Sure.
and I thought about the word amusing and how muse was in it, and then muse into virtuoso, and I thought, wouldn't it be neat if you had a game where you were playing a muse
Mm-hmm.
and you wanted to bring your virtuoso up to the highest peaks that there are, right? What would competing muses do? So it started off as sort of this kind of like silly little idea, and people will still say probably it's a silly little idea, and it turned into a very dark game.
Okay.
So in Bemused, each player takes on the role of a muse, and you're not going to raise the virtuoso you're inspiring up to their highest level by inspiring them and letting them do their great work, because that takes too long. And all the other competitors are really good too. So instead, you use dread and doubts to tear all their opponents down. So the idea is to be the last, have your virtuoso be the last one that's sane in the game. The other thing about Bemused is that all the virtuosos are different. So one might be a painter, one might be a dancer. And the idea is that whoever wins, that muse's art form becomes the dominant art form for the next 300 years. And so that's what you're really doing, is you're trying to say, I'm the muse of painters. Painting is the king of arts for 300 years. Now, having said that, there's no player elimination in Bemused. If you are driven to suicide, again, black mark.
This is a very dark game. Yes.
Yeah. You become a phantasma, right? My fancy word for ghost.
Sure.
But you can still win as a ghost, because when your turn comes, you can haunt the other players. And the ghosts can win. Insane players can win. Insane players, if it comes your turn, you're insane, you play randomly out of your hand.
Yeah.
Because you're insane. And the way that it's structured in the story is that if you are the last sane virtuoso standing and you win the game, because it's a point-based game, that art form becomes a dominant art form, right? If you are insane and you win the game, same type of thing. If you are the ghosts and you win the game, it's a total shift. So suddenly it's gone from, say, oh, it's not now representational art, it's performance art, right? So we're totally shifting. So it's a good outcome for humanity, no matter who wins the game. It is point-based.
Yeah.
And some people falsely believe that it's a social deduction game. It is certainly not a social deduction game. If you approach it as a social deduction game, you will be very disappointed.
I do want to ask, though, because you did bring up earlier that it started as a silly game and then turned into something very dark. And that brings up a point about game design too. I imagine there's a lot of iteration amongst different designs. Bemused, how many, what was like the iteration process there? How many times did you go back to the drawing board and do something and take things away?
So once, it's funny because sometimes a word will lock you down. So for Bemused, once I had the concept of doubt and dread, those locked it down. And then where I would go back and forth was what should the player's abilities be? How much should it cost to use? And do I really want to go down this area of being brutal to people? Because the thing about Bemused is that the real flavor of the game lies in the interaction of the people that play it, not what happens on the board.
Okay.
To be perfectly honest, if you read the rules for Bemused, and you play it according to the rules, it's not that much fun. But if you take the spirit of the game and you apply that, it can be a real hoot. For example, I've got some cards in my hand, and I've got the Thespian card. You're playing the Thespian. I go, here you go. I'm throwing a dread on you. Okay, next player, big deal, right? We're just tallying up the points and seeing how it goes. Yeah. But if I say, hey, remember that critic that despises you? I hope you don't mind. I gave him tickets to your show. And then you drop the card. That's when the trash talk starts.
Yeah.
That's when the wheeling and dealing goes, wait. Don't do that to me. Give the tickets to the dancer show. And in return, I will do this to this person.
Yeah.
And that's it. And without that social web holding it together, just mechanistically, the game is not fun.
Sure.
I hate saying that about my own game, but
hey,
what am I going to do? I'm honest.
Right. It's okay. Yeah. This is more of a therapy session. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I need it quite a bit.
Yeah, no worries. I do want to bring up, let's go to the next game. Now, this one actually was the very first game of yours I actually heard of. I'm not saying it in a mean way at all.
No, that's fine. But I fly under the radar. I've got very, very low production numbers.
No, and so I do want to talk about Dûhr to Lesser Houses. So in terms of, you were just mentioning right now actually too that you do fly under the radar. I mean, have you thought about like how do you market your games? Like, how did you market Dûhr the Lesser Houses out? Do you based on, do you send review copies? What are some things that you do? Not saying send me a review copy. I'm just saying.
So I do no advertising. I do no marketing. I rely solely on word of mouth.
Yeah.
I do send out review copies when people request them. There are a couple reviewers who were kind enough to ask me for review copies of Shadows of Malice.
Yeah.
And for those reviewers, I always like to give them first crack at a new game, and we'll offer to send them one. So folks like Dan Thurrott, Charlie Thiel.
This is photo too. This is Dan Thurrott's photo.
Okay. The good folks, Mike and Mark at So Very Wrong About Games, Ricky Royal. Mm-hmm. Those are a couple that come to mind. Mike Barnes he's one of the very, very great folks of There Will Be Games. So I try to hit them up, and then if people ask me for a copy, if I've got one, I'm happy to send it.
Sure.
So that's all. That's really all I do. I don't do anything else. I don't advertise at all. Yeah. And here's why. I know my games are quirky. Mm-hmm. I know my games can feel bizarre and strange. But when it comes down to what other people are looking for in games, I really don't care. Yeah. I do not care what you like. Yeah. And I'm not saying that because I don't like you. I'm saying that because I design games for me that I want to play, and I will play them with my friends. And if I think other people might enjoy them, I will make them available. So for me, if you buy a Devious Weasel game, my philosophy is I'm kind of inviting you in to play with me, and you're welcome to come in. But I'm not going to try to figure out what everybody wants and try to make it for them, because I'll just fail and I won't be happy and they won't be happy.
Sure. I mean, I imagine part marketing though too. I mean, could be absolutely getting being at Gen Con, having a presence there, going to different conventions and kind of having the game just speak for you. Yeah. And yeah, so why don't you tell us about Dûhr the Lesser Houses a little bit?
So Dûhr the Lesser Houses was an advance on Bemused with some slight differences. So in Bemused, I wanted a feeling of anxiety because it's all about doubts and dreads and being afraid and losing your mind. So the way I set up the the drawing system was that when your turn comes, you draw first and then play. Because I wanted the surprise of what you got to possibly rattle you. For Dŵr the Lesser Houses, it's a very similar structure where instead of doubts and dread, you're playing suspicions and scandals on other houses to try to bring the houses down to collapse. However, there's a couple of differences. One is in Dŵr, you play and then draw. So you scheme and you plan, then you play, and then you draw at the end of your turn. You can also do these masterstroke abilities, which negate other players' powers in Dŵr the Lesser Houses. In Dŵr the Lesser Houses, you have a special secret agenda card, and you get to choose one of two at the beginning of the game. One basically says you get so many points if things in your control come out a certain way. If the house on your conspiracy card is favored or the house on your conspiracy card is unfavored or something like that. Or you can pick one that has to do with the table state. If the two players to your left and right are both disfavored, you get so many points, right? So those are harder to get, but they give more points. So right away, you've got this different thing going on. The other big difference is in Bemused, when you're dead, you're dead. You're a phantasma, you play as a ghost, period. In Dŵr the Lesser Houses, it's all about status. So you can be driven from favored to disfavored to vilified. And as villain, you want to make more villains. The difficulty here is that you can be unvilified and brought back into favor or brought back into disfavor, which means all those villains you've created are now acting against you. So there's a real difficult balancing act in terms of do I think they're going to bring me back into favor just to spite me? Am I going to stay a villain? Can I make them a villain before they, devilify me, so to speak?
Yeah.
So there's this quote unquote coming back from the dead kind of situation here.
Yeah.
But this game plays in about both Bemused and Dŵr, if you know what you're doing, playing about 20 to 25 minutes. And going back to the concept we talked about earlier about making memories, there was a game I played when I was playing with my friend Chance, and I said, I'll trade you a green suspicion for a blue suspicion. He says, okay. So we put our cards on, slide them across the table, and I pick it up, and it's yellow. Like, you son of a gun. I will never forget that. And that's his go-to story when he talks about this game.
How he got you at Dŵr the Lesser Houses.
Oh, he nailed me. And by the way, as far as these games go, I may design them and I play them with my friends. I never win. I don't think I've ever, maybe one time I've won one of my own games.
Really?
Oh, I suck.
Well, it's what I'm finding really interesting too. Are not only you touched upon the setting and the theme, the mechanisms and the mechanics. I do want to talk about win conditions as well too, because I feel like that's something in particular that's very important, and it could make or break a game because it kind of changes how you think. So I do want to chime in and bring in this guy right over here, right? Let's talk about Cmyk Frog.
So you talk about iterations. So I'll tell you, Cmyk Frog was originally a game called Jotun about giants. And I had this vision of giants, big giants, right? Like titans. Okay. And tromping around the world, gathering stuff and stuffing it in their sacks, and then taking it out of their sacks and locking it away in their, in their vault. And that they would hit each other so hard, they would fly around the world. And you could fly around the world 3 or 4 times you've hit hard enough. And then you land and you destroy the land you fall on. And so that's what I want the game to be. And I'm working on it and I'm designing it and I'm having fun. And I'm thinking about the inventory system, right? Last in, first out kind of thing going on. And then I got to movement and I got stymied. because I was like, well, giants can walk, but you know what? They can run too, and they can leap. How am I going to have a simple movement point system where I can get these 3 movement modes in? And what if they want to move carefully? Does that mean they can move at half speed and not knock something down? Excuse me. And so it just got to be so much work that I said, forget it. I'm not doing giants. And then I thought, I'll do dragons, right? Dragons fly. Well, dragons can crawl too. Like, criminy.
Sure.
So again, I remember thinking I was actually in a subway while I was getting my car repaired, playing around with this game. And I thought, if I just had 1 movement mode, it would be so much easier. And that's when frogs came to mind. All they do is jump.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Cosmic Frog came from.
Yeah. And it's really so when I heard this game described, I was completely confused. I was just like, what did I rewound? I was listening to a podcast. I rewound the podcast to listen in and say, what the heck was that? and a lot of times when I play board games, I end up being the one that teaches the game. And I adore teaching Cosmic Frog because it's so exciting to explain to people the rules, because it looks like a totally weird game, and but it packs such a great thematic punch. Making it frogs was an awesome choice because it thematically it just works out perfectly.
It was serendipitous, right? The whole sack became the gullet.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I
love describing that to people.
I used the word disgorge in the rules, but I really wanted to say puke.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I try to add some colorful imagery whenever I can, like the mechanics when you end up swallowing too much terrain and it gets destroyed.
Yeah, exactly.
I usually, imply a lot of things. And
the younger kids always use some scatological humor for that.
Yeah, and and it's a really great game to explain. And yeah, so we did that first video, the live teach, and I had a great time doing it because part of the fun is we have people chiming in saying how ludicrous this game is, that it works and it's so much fun. Ryan Clements is saying Cosmic Frog is so much wacky fun, and that's true. Usually when I describe it I compare it to a Royal Rumble, from like wrestling, like taking people out of the ring and stuff. Mm-hmm. But bringing it back to what I was talking about before, which is the victory conditions, I find that the most intriguing part about this game, because I've played many take that games where if you're just knocked out, like that's it. And this game has a great.
I'm sorry, I lost you. You played many take that games where.
Yeah, I've played many take that games where you get knocked out and you're just done. You're not coming back. But this game, no matter how hard you're punching, there's no player elimination. At the end of the game, it's just if you have the tiles, your tiles in the right configuration, you're gonna win. And I really do like that a lot. So I was very excited when we were talking about doing a teaching segment of this, and I was like, I know my first game done.
Well, thank you.
But I do want to talk about a game that I played for the first time yesterday, and this is your upcoming game. And again, the setting just drove me into immediate intrigue, and that's the Mirroring of Mary King. So yeah, go ahead. If you want to talk about this one, feel free.
So the Mirroring of Mary King is about a young mortal woman named Mary King who visits Edinburgh in Scotland and visits a real place called Mary King's Close, which is a haunted alleyway named after the 17th century merchant burgess of the same name, Mary King. And the story goes that the ghost of that Mary King is hanging around haunting the alleyway and sees her ancestor and says, wow, nice body. I think I want to take that over and live again. And so it's a battle between the ghost Mary King trying to possess the body of the living mortal descendant Mary King, and the descendant trying to fight off the ghost. And this is a two-player game where one person plays the ghost and one person plays Mary King. And it is a battle over 5 days. And you play two types of cards, control cards, which flip the tiles, which you can see comprise Mary King's psyche, trying to get it to the picture that you want. The ghost wants the all blue picture. The mortal wants the living color picture. If you turn it to your picture, gain total control of her psyche, you win the game and it ends instantly. Meanwhile, the card you have in your deck is called your mind, and you're spending them and using them. So you're eroding your mind and getting weaker and weaker as the game goes on. And if you run out of cards, you lose your mind and you lose, and your opponent wins. At the end of each player's turn, there's sort of psychic shocks that go back and forth that cause you to lose pieces of your mind, it's cards from your deck, based on how much of the psyche of Mary's psyche your opponent controls at the time. And so the main thing about this game, three of the things that are kind of, I think, intriguing about this game are: one, both players sit at the same side of the table. Functionally, it's so that they can both see the image of Mary and have a better idea of what their flips will do. From a setting perspective, it's because both of them are really the same entity. So they're part of the fighting of the same psyche. So they're joined. They're next to each other rather than across from each other. The control over the psyche versus buying these new ideas that come up during the game. There's a trade-off there where the longer the game goes on, as you progress through the week, the less control you have because you're getting exhausted. Physical Mary is getting exhausted. The ghost is expending her resources. But you're getting more desperate. So you're reaching out and grabbing all these harebrained ideas, quote unquote. So that's why there's a trade-off. As the game goes on, you get more ideas, but less ability to exert actual control over the tiles. If the game goes to the end of Friday, then we add up points. And the bulk of your points are the number of cards left in your deck when you reach the end. So if you play aggressively at the beginning, you hurt yourself in the long game. If you play conservatively at the beginning, you may lose out because the other person completes the tableau, or you may be in a better position for the long game because you've got a healthier mind.
And I really love that trade-off a lot. So I played it yesterday, and I love the trade-off where you're kind of, it's not just what hand of cards you have. You are really in control. Sure, you could spend all 5 cards and kind of just go at it as hard as you can, but at the same time, you could be potentially losing points out. And I do like that trade-off. It is a very thinky game. I know I took a little long on some turns for sure for the first play, but
hey, you were just learning, man.
Yeah, that's what I mean though. The second play, it was just picking up, and it was a lot more. I had a lot more interesting decisions, in terms of what to do as opposed to just blurting out all my cards, and people are saying right now, like the vibe is really cool, and that's something I do want to highlight about all these games we talked about today. I think you knock it out of the park, honestly, with the settings.
Thank you.
The games very much tell a story, not only with the setting, but with how you're handling the theme, the mechanisms, and mechanics, how you're handling all of that. It really just delivers it, because there's very common stereotype, I guess, about modern board games where it's most of them are like trading in the Mediterranean, or or zombies or whatever, right? And just seeing all these unique games just come out, it's always exciting to see what is in there, because it feels like too I'm also part of like an experiment, which is great.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
So before I forget, let me give a shout out to some artists, right? So
Sure.
Mary King, this is again Naomi Robinson.
Okay.
So
from
Zimmy Mojo.
Zimmy Mojo, right?
Correct. And then in Cmyk Frog, the mat, the astral picture on the mat was from a man named Tim Barton.
Okay.
The frogs were sculpted by Chad Hoverter.
Yeah.
I believe he did the sculpts for Mice and Mystics, for example.
Okay.
But the art of the Zimbies themselves in the rule book and the art of the frogs in Cmyk Frog was done by a fantastic artist out in California named Tawny Pettit.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just phenomenal. And I really just wanted to give her a shout out.
And you just started. I saw that you listed some of the prints as posters too. Like you had the Empyrean as a print.
Yeah, I'm working on that now. But the difficulty is I am unabashedly lazy by nature.
Sure.
And I don't want to have a whole bunch of posters in my house that I have to buy shipping tubes for and mail and all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to find a print on demand partner who will also drop ship. Yeah. So I think I found one. And I've got actually sometime between tomorrow and Monday is when the proofs will be delivered for the Empyrean poster. If it looks good, I'll make them available. Yeah. And my intention is to have all 16 of the frogs available as posters. They would be 12 by 18 inches on high quality glossy paper. And with everything together, including shipping and tax and all that, there'll be about, I think, $25 a pop.
Yeah. That sounds pretty exciting. I mean, that's great. And by the way, Empyrean for those, that's the cover. That's the box art is the Empyrean frog. Because, in the game, there's different ability cards and they have different art. So do we, before I let you go, if anyone has any questions too for Jim, feel free to shoot them on in the chat. I am addressing them and trying my best to read them and put them on. I do want to ask a couple questions.
Sure.
Totally off the cuff. Here we go. Here we go. Off the cuff. So I know that on Board Game Geek, you could have micro badges, and the very first one of yours is a David Bowie fan one. So why don't you tell me about your favorite Bowie album and or song?
Well, my favorite Bowie album is The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars.
Same. Okay.
Although lately, when I hear the song 5 Years, I keep thinking, dude, that's now.
Right? Yeah, so it is now.
It's kind of depressing. And it's funny because I had an old minivan that served me very well. It was a Ford Windstar, powder blue Ford Windstar. And that thing had well over 200,000 miles on it. And it went from child to child, right? So my second child had it. They were out at band practice. And they called it the powder blue swag wagon.
Okay.
And it died. And it died at the same time we found out the news on the same day that David Bowie died.
Oh, geez.
So my kids are saying, the dude wanted the wagon. The dude took the car. So we imagine David Bowie driving around in the powder blue swag wagon.
That's funny. I have Josh asked a question. He asked, for Jim, what is your favorite game to play with friends that is not your own?
Since I love stories so much, and I really enjoy playing both Betrayal at the House on the Hill, and Mysterium. So I think Betrayal is probably my favorite. To play with friends.
I actually gave Josh my copy of Betrayal. No, because he's one of my closest friends. So I know if I need to play it, I could always go to his house.
So, my kids loved it, and we had it at the house. Then they gave me a copy for my birthday a couple years later, and then one of them got a copy for Christmas. We had like 3 copies floating around.
Oh man, there's like a Scooby-Doo one now too. There's all sorts of Betrayal.
I'll tell you another game I love to play though is the simplest game. Have you heard of a game called Pente?
No, I have not. I should.
Excuse me. It's
card game.
No, it's a mat
Okay.
Now, you can buy the boxed one with like a board, but the tube has a rollout mat in it, and it's a material like they made the battle mats on for D&D.
Okay.
And it's basically a grid, and you've got 2 players or more, and they each have these colored beads. And you're just trying to you move on the crosshairs anywhere you want, and just trying to get 5 in a row. That's it.
Yeah.
But there's some tricks and some rules to it that and ways to capture. Very simple game. Absolutely a freaking joy to play.
Pente, Pente.
Yep.
Okay, I'll have to look it up. And Chris chimed in saying, "Betrayal is that game I will always say can create some of the best memories."
Yeah.
We have one from Ryan Clements about Cosmic Frog. Cosmic Frog is best at the most players you can get. Is there a way to mold the game into a better experience for 2 players, especially nowadays when I can pretty much only play with my spouse?
So my recommendation there is to play multiple frogs using the team play variant. So you would be a team, your wife would be a team, and you'd each have 2 frogs or 3 frogs if you really want to go crazy. But if it's only 2 of you and you're lenient with how much time you give each other on your turns, and you're try playing 2 or 3 frogs on a team and go team versus team.
Yeah, with the shared vault, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think, unless there's any other questions about anything, Jim, it's been great having you on. I had a blast tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. I really had a lot of fun, and I look forward to watching you do more of these.
Yeah. And so we have some videos coming up next. Chris, I don't know what they are. Sorry. But he could chime in with the comments down below. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next Creators Corner, Tabletop Express, choo-choo, right? Bye.
Ta-ta.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And